Hi, everyone. The City of Coquitlam staff would like to begin by acknowledging with respect and gratitude today that we are hosting this event on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Coast Salish peoples and the home of the Coquitlam First Nations. We are very fortunate to live and work on this beautiful land of fresh water, forests, and mountains. Welcome to the fourth and final lecture of the Recreation Facility Innovation Lecture Series. This is Planning for Youth and Senior Facilities. The city is currently planning more than a dozen major recreation cultural facility projects in the next 10 to 15 years. And in July of 2020, the city began development of the major recreation and cultural facilities roadmap. This is a user-friendly document that distills and maps out the very complex process of funding, operating, designing, and constructing of facility projects. And in planning for these works, we are hosting this lecture series in order to capture innovative ideas for a number of new and renewed facilities. Also to discover ideas on how to design inclusive and accessible buildings, and to find emerging trends in recreation and facility design. My name is Nerida Iko, and I work here at the City of Coquitlam. And on my team today, I have Tina Mack. She is the Manager of Recreation and Cultural Facility Planning here at the City of Coquitlam. I also have Conrad Boychuk. He is a retired architect, currently a board member of the IAKS, and will be here helping us lead the discussion today. We also have two registered sign interpreters, and in order to pin the ASL videos, please click the three dots on the upper right corner and select the pin option. Provided that you do have the latest version of Zoom, you will be able to pin both sign interpreters. We also have Alex Nelson and Dennis Sandstrom from the consulting firm HDR, who will be providing technical support for us today. If at any point during the lecture you would have a question that you would like to pose to either the city or a panelist, please feel free to enter it here anonymously. You can scan the QR code and it will also be referenced within the group chat. If there's a question that you see and you would like to be answered, please hit the like button so we can prioritize it within the discussion. Today, we will hear from a panel of internationally practicing architects, planners, and designers who will share their insights and experiences in order to help develop this roadmap. Not only does this benefit the city, but we recognize that sharing these events as public conversations can help in the planning of other municipalities' community facilities, as well as other organizations. This also helps foster industry-wide best practices and connections. I'd now like to take the time to introduce our panelists for today. Starting off with John Martinez. He is the Executive Director of Parks and Recreation at the City and County of Denver. John, you can take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Martinez, City and County of Denver, and I have the proud honor to serve as the Mayor's Deputy Executive Director of Recreation for the city. And so I have 20 plus years in DPR, Denver Parks and Recreation. So I've built my career in the city that I was born and raised. And so that's one unique fact about me. Next, please. I think I lost this slide here. So Denver Parks and Recreation is a very large Parks and Recreation organization, one of the largest in the state. We have over 30 recreation centers with another one in the queue to be built here in the next couple of years. We have 31 pools, with 16 of those being indoors and 15 of those being outdoor. And we are also in the designing and construction of an additional 2 indoor pools, which will bring us to 33 pools. The way we're structured, we have core program areas, including community recreation, which is focused on out-of-school programming, our active older adults, which is our 55 plus population, and then our youth sports, which is one of our largest program areas, serving over 20,000 youth annually, as well as having over 1,200 DPR employees. And that's just on the recreation side of things. As an agency, we have close to 3,000 employees just in Parks and Recreation. Next, please. So what we do in Denver is obviously challenges, is look for creative partnerships to make sure that we're providing our communities the level of service that they deserve. And so what we do is we seek out private partners, also looking at how we leverage our internal resources, whether it's another city agency. And then we also have a few citywide initiatives that are special revenue to help subsidize our youth and senior programs. So that's just a quick snap of what DPR is. I know we'll dive into some more questions that will get more details of what Denver Parks and Recreation does for youth and our active older adults.
Thank you, John. I'd now like to pass it over to Katie Barnes, COO and Principal at Barker Rinker CCAT Architecture.
Good morning. Thank you, Narita. I'm Katie Barnes with Barker Rinker CCAT Architecture, or BRS for short. We are headquartered out of Denver, Colorado. Have a small firm in Dallas, Texas as well. We're excited to be here today. Next slide, please. A little bit about myself. I've been with BRS for about 23 years. As Narita mentioned, I'm an architectural principal at the firm and the managing partner. Next slide, please. We're having our 46th anniversary for the firm actually here in a couple of weeks, which is pretty exciting for us. My business partners and I have been developing a firm that is dedicated to planning, designing, and building places that strengthen community. So we're very passionate about projects which bring people together. Next slide, please. And in the couple of years that I've been, or a couple of decades rather, that I've been with BRS, I've seen the firm's impact on recreation design in the United States in terms of bringing new innovations and really pushing recreation design forward within the US. Next slide, please. On the subject of this seminar, youth and seniors, and one of the processes that our firm has innovated is our public engagement. We've tailored our in-house public engagement services for various user groups of our facilities. This photo is of a seniors group playing what we call the card game, which we begin in early feasibility, early design phase to reach consensus on the preferred program for the facility and also generate buy-in on the part of the various stakeholder groups engaged in the design process. Next slide, please. We also have various engagement processes for youth. And this was an example of a ice cream social that we held, and we asked folks to, youth to draw items that they would like to see in a new recreation center. And this is a photo of some of the youngest members, future users of the recreation facility. We also had a lot of engagement from teens and incorporated some of their recommendations into the final building, which was really exciting for them as well as for us. Next slide, please. In 2020, as many folks have done, and as an example with this seminar, when we couldn't meet in person, we switched to a virtual model pretty quickly. And we felt a silver lining of the pandemic was that we saw actually increased rates of participation in community engagement meetings. And that was really exciting. So due to that sort of inclusive aspect of our virtual process, we are going to continue offering virtual community engagement and virtual client workshops when it's appropriate for the project. Next slide, please. As you all know, varying lifestyles and abilities and needs are really defining the future design of community facilities. We believe there's more inclusivity than ever before, which is great. And our clients have new objectives as a result for the design of their facilities. Recreation services are really evolving more and more into community-wide services. So next slide, please. Everybody's needs are different, of course, and active programs will continue to be a critical component, as you all know, of all community centers. We also believe Next slide, please. That passive activities in community centers are equally as important for those folks who aren't as physically engaged in recreation. These social activities are critical for mental and physical health as well. Next slide, please. And as a result, about 75% of our firm's work is in community recreation, community centers, and each year our firm hosts a conference which we specifically work with Parks and Rec folks to understand the intricacies of planning, designing, building, and operating community recreation centers. It's really an immersive event that we have several tours, we discuss trends and discover key ways to making successful projects. I'm excited to be here. Thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you, Katie. Last but not least, we have Laura Christine Biermunch, Head of Projects at Royal Dania.
Yeah, thank you. And hi, everybody. I'm Laura. I'm very pleased with the invitation to speak today. So thank you very much to the facility team of the City of Coquitlam for that. Today, as you said, I'm Head of Projects in Royal Dania, which in short is a Copenhagen-based private philanthropic organization. We donate around 150 million Canadian dollars per year to the built environment. But before that, I formerly worked for the Danish Foundation for Culture and Sports Facilities, which task is to contribute to the innovation of the physical framework for our recreational life. Next slide, please. A few generations ago, we used to play in the streets. We felt the boundaries of the physical structures. We used the built environment as a creative back heel, and we actually made up our own games. This little flash of history tends to have been my guideline throughout the many years that I've been working with the innovation of recreational facilities. Next slide, please. Because the task has been to move the focus away from the conventional approach based on the standardized facilities towards an approach which to a much greater extent is based on the actual development in people's physical and cultural activities, as well as on architectural and aesthetic parameters. It has all been about the possibilities of providing a rich recreational life with opportunities for physical activity, of course, but also in a frame of development of achievements, competition, play, and creativity on your own, and especially as part of a strong community. So all parameters of great importance when it comes to the young ones as well, for whom it's all about being able to identify with place and activity and the friends, of course. Next slide, please. Because this one used to be a traditional sport hall, but as part of our modernization process back in 2015, the facility was extended with a community space for local community and especially for youth in the local community. So yes, they can play badminton and handball in the sport facility, but they can also go next door and relax, hang out with their friends and do their own things in their own way in the sports facility. Next slide, please. And another example is the game Copenhagen, a street facility for basketball, which is about a lot more than basketball. It's actually a hot spot for youth culture with dance, hip hop, poetry slam, DJ schooling. So it's you can call it recreational life for young people by young people. Next slide, please. And right now in Denmark, as all about the world, I guess, after the COVID-19, the hugest trend is being outdoor-driven activities. And for the young people especially, the self-organized activities defined by the play and by the dialogue between the spectators and the practitioners is in the core. And here they actually use the facility in a very creative way. the used one, because it was original meant only for strolling and sunbathing and the easy reading a book park-like. But is being used by youth in very creative ways. Next slide, please. But when we talk about the future, the big concern should be that a large number of school children do not engage in the recommended minimum level of 60 minutes of physical activity per day. That goes for Denmark and other Western countries. And the fact that the girls are even less likely to meet the recommendation than the boys. Next slide, please. And also the fact that the level of physical activity declines with age. Next slide, please. Plus that we really should have to address the social gradient in physical activity. In Denmark, it is so that when almost 1/3 of the children aged 11 to 15 years old from high socioeconomic families have an appropriate level of physical activity, it only goes for 1/5 of the children from the low economic families. Next slide, please. And the last, because not least, the fact that we know that meaningful social relations and an active lifestyle has a positive impact on quality of life and the length of life really set an emphasis under that we do have to continue to be very ambitious and develop the facilities for the recreational life of children and young ones, so that we can establish a solid platform for their future active life, and hopefully a life filled with a lot of meaningful relations. So I hope that a strategic plans that what you're working on in Coquitlam can contribute to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. That was a wonderful introduction. I will now pass it over on to Conrad, who will be leading our discussion today. Conrad, I'll give you the floor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Narita. So I'd just like to have a couple of opening comments, and then I will get right to the questions. And we have quite a few, so I'm going to try to group them. But as an opening comment, I'd say we come to this set of panel discussions, to the end of this set of panel discussions, with a focus on groups and not buildings or programs. In dealing with youth and seniors, we are led more by a social narrative than a design one. We hear of youth at risk, and we hear of seniors at risk. This often necessitates a need for heightened dialogue with individuals or groups who are, by their nature, often more difficult to engage. So my sense is that this panel session of the 4 that we've had is perhaps the most meaningful from a social perspective. And I was really intrigued and fascinated to hear the 3 introductions by our panelists today. So I'm going to start with a question to the panelists, and this is in regards to youth-directed questions. What are the current trends in youth programming, and how do these innovations in youth services translate into building forms and exterior spaces? And as an adjunct to that, how do you engage youth in a consultative process, and how do you give them ownership? So we will start, I think, John, we will start with you on this one.
Great. Thanks, Conrad. So in Denver, we have a program called My Denver, which is free access to 100,000 Denver youth from 5 to 18. And when you talk about how do we get youth involved, we empower our youth. And we've actually started programs that are youth ambassadors that are really driving the community process when we talk about reimagining what recreation looks like. Because as the communities change, we want to make sure that we're intentional on what we're providing. And so through these youth ambassadors, they really are the voice of the community when it comes to youth opportunities. And we found that to be very successful. They actually, our first ambassador program led to an amazing project in St. Charles Park, which wouldn't have been possible without their support of seeking out local businesses and creating partnerships. And so it's really authentic community engagement and involving the right demographic of who's going to lead that effort. And so, I've been in this field for many years, and it's really shifted to involving more community versus having a design and city folks, being the voice of the community. It's really changed over the last decade, at least in Denver. So being intentional and thinking outside the box, engaging the demographics. And focusing in Denver is really connecting our families to the outdoors. We have such great spaces where we have aging infrastructure in some of our facilities. And Katie and her firm were instrumental in building our flagship rec center. And we know we can't provide that same amenity in all communities, but so connecting families to the outdoor spaces, especially because we live in Colorado where we're, a 15-minute drive up to the mountain. So really exposing them to their neighborhoods and with the hope of progressing up into our natural spaces.
Thank you, John. And when we were putting this question together, I was actually remembering your presentation in Cologne and the extent to which you have external parklands trails and that whole exterior experience, which is, I think, pretty typical of Denver. Katie, in your presentation, you touched to a large degree, which I thought was really interesting, on the engagement process. So could you respond to the question and focus a little bit on the engagement process, in this case, specifically how it deals with youth?
Yes, thanks, Conrad. And as John mentioned, we're seeing centers introducing sports and activities that really traditionally have been limited to certain economic or cultural groups to increase inclusivity to other groups, which has been incredibly empowering. And we've, as I briefly mentioned in my introduction, we've been designing our community engagement process specific to the community and the culture in which we're working. So with a lot of diversity across the United States, we've worked with local sort of community leaders, whether or not they have actually a position on a municipal staff or not, but they have a voice within the community for the various cultural groups. And we like to reach out to those folks and ask them to help us design programs to reach those different cultural groups. And it may revolve around food. It may revolve around a game or an activity. It may be closing off a local main street, small main street, so that you can bring families out and get adults engaged, teenagers engaged, and then the younger folks in various activities that are really appropriate to who they are. And we have authentic feedback as a result. We're also seeing engagement in other than just sort of, as I mentioned previously, the athletic activities, increasing STEAM and STEM holistic pursuits. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with STEAM is science, technology, engineering, arts, and the math programs into outside of school programs, but into community centers and into the outdoor spaces around Denver. As you mentioned, Conrad, and as John mentioned, we're really lucky in Colorado to have phenomenal outdoor activity spaces located close by, but also indoor activities in cooking, life skills, computer coding classes, and things like that. And so engaging in what the interests of those various groups are specifically has helped us in terms of that public outreach piece.
Okay, thank you, Katie. And to Laura, the same question, recognizing that in Copenhagen in particular, I think there's a kind of a world-class approach to dealing with and engaging the youth. So let's hear your comments on the question.
Yeah, I think generally in Denmark, and I guess this goes for the other countries as well, we do see a very activist-orientated youth. They're very focused on sustainability. They want to take part of the developing of the society. And if you ask them to join the development processes, they actually very much will like to take part, but you have to ask them and you have to treat them equal to the other parts in the processes. And that is actually, as I showed you the picture from Game, that's what happened there. That was an idea that took place and came from 3 young boys who went to different key persons in the municipality and talked the idea through with them. And throughout a couple of years, they got to establish a process where they were the key role in the process. And today, but of course, they were supported very heavily by the city's employees. But today they are running the facility themselves with money from the city to do the maintenance and daily maintenance. So I actually think that if we look at the teenagers in the same height as we look at the other fellows in our processes, we can actually activate them and they can contribute for a great deal.
Okay, thank you. And I know that in 2019, I think it was 2019 in Cologne, we had a presentation from you folks from GAIN, and it was clear that all of those programs came from the youth. They weren't the group that was being engaged. They initiated the process. So we'll get on now to the other side of the question, and that is the seniors. And there are two questions here, and I want to ask them separately. So the first one is an aging and active older population influencing recreation center design? And how does this growth or the growth of that group influence programming? So let's reverse it. And Laura, we will start with you on this.
Well, indeed, they have an impact, the growing aging group, simply because there are so many, and they are going to be more many in the years to come. In Denmark, the healthy part of the group are very active during daytime, and they are full of resources. So they pose a lot of questions and demand a lot of things from the facility owners, but they also contribute a lot. And programmatic wise, they actually ask for the place to do the activity, but what is as important is the meeting point, the place where they can be together in relation to the activity, where they can take a cup of coffee, eat their lunch together, make some food together. So that weighs just as much in the process or in the programming.
And is there in Denmark an equivalent to GAME for seniors, or are they not quite as active and motivated in terms of creating that very unique kind of scenario?
No, actually not yet, but I think it will come. They're more like in some cities, they're pretty good at going to the city municipality and ask for the facilities. But they are not this good as joining in the process. But when we get out to the rural areas, we see that they engage a lot within the developing process of their local community.
Okay, thank
but
you.
But not in the big cities.
Okay, so John, we'll go to you on this question now.
Great. And so we have a similar program for our active older adults as My Denver. We have a My Denver Pride membership, which is free access to any Denver resident that's 60 and over that doesn't qualify for our Silver Sneakers program. And so I've definitely seen a shift in programming and spaces within our facilities. We had 2 dedicated active older adult facilities. That was really the traditional bingo, potlucks, cooking, and it's really shifted now to more active. You have more folks that are retiring at an earlier age that want to still continue to be active, and so repurposing our spaces, adding weight rooms, which we traditionally didn't have, and then spreading programs throughout the cities. Right, instead of having only 2 facilities, now we have senior programs at all 30 rec centers because. During the daytime, when our youth are in school and are 18 to 59 are working, our buildings are vacant. So being creative, what kind of programming, but also being very intentional on what the community need is. It's not a one size fits all. Every community is different. And so meeting them where they're at. And I think one of the things that we learned over the past 15 months was they really need that social interaction no matter what age. And so we were very intentional on reaching out to all of our active older adults that had memberships, just do wellness checks to see where they were. And that's something that we'll continue to do. I think, we learned a lot through these virtual programs. A lot of folks loved it because they could do it in their own living room. But there was, on the flip side, folks want that social interaction to come to our facilities just as gathering places, whether they're sitting in the lobby having a cup of coffee, but really, looking at every community and making sure that we're meeting the needs for everyone that we serve, no matter what the age in our community.
Okay, thank you, John. And the same question to Katie, and perhaps Katie, if you could respond with a little bit more depth in terms of how it affects the actual design process and where you might be going in terms of future facilities.
Absolutely. We, as Laura mentioned, the baby boomer generation actually had a huge influence on recreation center design, indoor pools and things, which in the United States we were working on in the 1980s. That generation had a huge influence on the first design of interior climbing walls in Colorado and interior activity pools in Colorado. And they're still influencing them today. Again, as Laura mentioned, they're a large group and they started influencing when they were younger and they continue to do so now. And in some of the ways in which they're influencing the centers, in part, active adults, as John mentioned, love pickleball. Pickleball is a huge popular activity now for the acting agers. And so we are doing a lot of outdoor and indoor pickleball courts for tournaments and things. We also are actually looking at nutrition programs for lunch provided for seniors in community centers. And that has a big influence, to your point, Conrad, on the design of commercial kitchens within these facilities, and commercial kitchens that can be flexible for use for some of the senior lunch programs are certified. And so they have requirements for the design of that kitchen and the multi-purpose space. Also, as John mentioned, and to your question, Conrad, about where it's going, we're actually seeing that the synergy between youth and seniors might design spaces that can be very flexible for youth or seniors, but the programming is really where the specialty focus goes to, so that we have spaces that have billiard tables and table tennis or ping pong and esports. And we have youth tournaments for esports and we have senior tournaments for esports. So those spaces can be very flexible, but then relative to specialty program is how they are used. As John mentioned, during the day when kids are in school, the adults can use same space as the youth are using after school. So that's been kind of exciting and encourages inclusivity in our facilities.
Great, thank you. One of your comments leads to not the next question, but the one after that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say and the panelists have to say about that synergy that you talked about. But I want to just ask a quick question now about engagement. How do you engage seniors in a consultative process, recognizing that while some seniors are extremely well organized and know how to advocate for themselves, there are others who lack the capacity to easily engage. And Katie, we'll stay with you on this and then we'll go to the other panelists.
It's a great question and one that we're thinking a lot about. We have a client right now in California who, for our virtual public meetings with the senior groups during the pandemic, they actually had rec staff, Parks and Recreation staff, that would set up the technology in the senior center or in the community center with physical distancing and masks and careful setup, but it encouraged folks who might otherwise not engage in a virtual meeting to, if the technology was intimidating or they had physical abilities that didn't allow them to set up the technology for themselves, the rec staff actually had folks set it up for them. We're thinking we might bring this to other communities as well, where when we're boots on the ground, we can help set up that technology where, as John mentioned, like going to where the seniors meet, so that we can help those folks still have a voice on what they think, what activities they could take part in, and their friends and family members could take part in as well, whether it's at the senior center or a multi-generational center.
Okay, thank you, Katie. And John, why don't you give us your perspective in Denver from your position?
Yes, all right. So what we do in Denver is that we require all of our rec centers to have yearly community engagement plans. And so being embedded in the community and meeting people where they're at. And so that's going out to the assisted living homes or the grocery stores, the churches, to get that feedback from our folks, because if folks aren't coming to our building, I want to know why. And so I think it's about having staff embedded in the community instead of just working at a facility. It makes a huge difference. And we had 2.5 million visits in 2019, which was up from 2017 by almost 1 million visitors. And that was after we implemented that, individual community engagement plan. Just like I said, each community endeavor is different. And so you have some very affluent neighborhoods that are very vocal, and have a direct contact to their city council. And then you have other communities that don't have that voice. So we want to make sure that we provide that platform. And so meeting with the RNOs, meeting with the community leaders. And so very intentional on what we do when it comes to community engagement and including, everyone that lives in that community.
Okay, thank you, John. And Laura, your perspective.
Yes, I think that we have to take account of that they are a very complex group, the seniors. I mean, you can be 80 and perfectly fit, and you can be 65 and totally worn down and not useful for anything, to say so. But when we talk about the more vulnerable group, we have to acknowledge that they might not go to the facility themselves. And if we make a public invitation, they might not see it. They might not think it's addressing them. So we have to take care of making arrangement with a very low entrance barrier. And it could be something like making community eatings get together with a low entrance barrier. It could also, as you said, Katie, and you were talking about, John, be where they are. We are talking about something called the third place, the places of necessity in everyday life, that everybody has to go down to the grocery store to buy some food. The times and times you go to the library to rent a book. You have to go to the doctor's house. So those kind of facilities, try to meet them where they have to go and try to make them feel that this is for you as well. And we know that you need some help to be a part of this process. And they might not play as big part in the process, but they have to be recognized and they have to be able to see themselves in the process and in the result afterwards as well. But it is a delicate process. And you could use NGOs, patient organizations, and others who could represent those vulnerable groups. But I think everybody has to do an effort to try to reach out to them.
Yeah, for sure. Public engagement isn't an invitation for the public to engage with the consultants or the service provider. You have to go out and find these people and make the effort to engage them. So I want to get back to one of the things Katie mentioned, because it almost perfectly paraphrases one of the questions that we have under what we've called the holistic question. Is there a synergy with youth and seniors in terms of facilities, programs, and interaction? And since Katie, you were the one that kind of introduced the synergy comment, which just dovetails so nicely into this, why don't you take the first response here?
Sure, and as Laura mentioned, it's sort of a stereotype to say that all youth want active programming and all seniors want passive programming. There's such diversity, and so to be very respectful of that diversity, we feel that community centers are for all people, not just for few people, and really being aware of those various needs and desires, and then ensuring that we have space designed to allow for that unique programming is critical. We like to create spaces that fulfill certain types of activities. Just decide if you want it to be active or slower. Is it need to be louder or quieter type of space? And then encourage interaction amongst the different ages and the different abilities as well. So as I mentioned previously, there are several activities, whether they're active like pickleball or ping pong. They could be a little bit more passive like billiards or esports. We don't want to provide those for a separate room for youth and a separate room for seniors. If the programming can be flexible, but have flexible space and dedicated programming, that seems to be the trend now. Specialty populations obviously increase participation in these centers. And so how do we develop that synergy and be respectful of the various needs of the different cultures and groups? So we've provided curtains at windows that are looking into aerobics classrooms or spinning classrooms for certain groups that might have body perception concerns, or curtains at the mirrors in the dance rooms. Well, there's other groups for whom that's appropriate as well. We're working with a group of Muslim women right now who want to have a mommy and baby swim class, and that just requires special design of the facility, but it allows the interaction of various groups. And the spirit of ADA, of course, it doesn't care your age or ability, but it's designed for various ages and abilities, multiple. So that encourages that synergy between youth and the active adults, or various different cultural groups. And we like to think in terms of how can people be engaged in different types of activities? Do they want to see it and observe it and enjoy by observing? Do they want to be in it? Or are they a support group, but also want to feel that they're a part, they have a belonging with a greater group? So it's a really exciting time right now to be thinking about the impact of design for various groups while also encouraging synergy between them.
Okay, thanks, Katie. And John, taking it to the program side of it, what are your views in terms of this possible synergy between youth and seniors?
Yeah, and I've seen it a shift for the last several years and doing more multi-generational programs, offering shared spaces, but also being intentional on the program offerings. And so we offer, a pickleball tournament where we involve youth and active older adults. And so that's been very successful. Our cooking classes of getting, parents and their kids in. And in some of our communities, right, if it's a culture that they didn't grow up doing, they don't feel comfortable putting their kids in it. So it's a way to get both the parents and the kids, our grandparents involved. And so every offering program that we offer it to, from whether you're a senior or a youth, if it's appropriate for that facility. But like Katie mentioned, we don't want to have one space that is for our active older adults and one space for our youth, because I don't want those barriers. The community center is for the entire community, not, when you start separating spaces, it creates that tension within the facility. And so we found it to be very successful. One of our programs we've been doing is taking families out to our mountain parks. And so we have grandparents that, lived in Denver their whole life, have never been up to a mountain park in some of our communities. So very intentional on how we promote and market our programs. But there's definitely a shift in moving towards more multi-generational. And again, in spaces within our facility, whether it's the gym, where historically we've, had hours that youth use at this hour and our adults use at this hour. Now it's open gym, and then let's have a game with our youth and our parents. And so I like that model, and I think it's working well in Denver.
Okay, thank you. And Laura, why don't you give us the Danish perspective here?
Yes, and I actually very much like the American Katie perspective, because the thing that when you start focusing on the more generic human values and qualities of a certain activity or just being in a room, you make the analysis of how are you going to act in that room before you draw it. Just thinking of the activity, whether it's going to be 18 times 9 meters or whatever it is. So that's very important, I think. But it's also important to think about if you want to make a local recreational facility that is well grounded and working very well, you need the users to take ownership to the facility, and that goes for the youth and that goes for the seniors. So I think you have to try to make the analysis of what kind of fields can they do something together that gives them ownership, and that could be something about how to organize the activities, how to maintain the activity, the volunteering work around drive a recreational facility. And then there are activities besides the physical activities. The kids are what you could call the glue that could make this recreational facility to be a good one, like what I said before, eating together, handcrafts workshops where the old people can learn and teach the youth their skills, and the other way around, as you said, Katie, the esports, the technical computering things. We do in Denmark still have a whole generation who do not like to use the internet and the computers. There's still a lot to go, vice versa. So I think you have to try to find the small stuff in amongst the activities.
And is there an equivalent in terms of, I think I might have asked an aspect of this before, but having toured a lot of facilities in Copenhagen, I see a profound focus on youth. I don't quite see it, and it may be that I'm just not there at the right time of the day. So in your harbor baths, I might see lots of seniors, but I don't see them in the typical facilities that you see, even on the beach, these artificial wharfs. Are you able to start bringing seniors into that, or is that kind of synergy not there yet?
The synergy is absolutely not there, and you're touching a very soft spot, and your observation is totally correct. We are right now talking about that the last 10, 20 years, we have been designing cityscapes only for youth. We have made tons of skate rinks, parkour facilities, ball games facilities, basketball rinks and stuff like that. We have designed for the youth. And then the seniors, we make a bench in the corner and say, well, you can be the spectator. And they would like to be the spectator, but they would also like to be able to identify with the design of the facility, and nothing in that facility speaks to them. So we actually are talking about now, how can we make a new kind of, when we design our new cities, how can we make a grid that take a knowledge of the seniors? Because we have to think in a new way. It's kind of a shift in paradigms. We have to think a new way on the seniors, because they are active in up age a lot more than they were before, and they demand something, and they want to be part of the society and the social relations. So no, we haven't done it yet, but we do have to start it, and the discussion and debate has started now.
Okay, thank you. So with that as a closing statement, I'm going to pass the mic, so to speak, on to Narita, who will ask the panelists of questions from some of our spectators.
Hi, thank you, Conrad. So yes, we will be moving on to the Q&A portion of this discussion. So one of the first questions that I'd like to start off with is one that we ask and has been very often asked from our audience. Are there any innovative ideas that have not yet been incorporated into some new facilities? Innovative ideas that were missed opportunities? I'll start this off over with a municipal perspective with John. Sorry, John, you are muted.
Can you repeat it? I broke up, sorry.
No worries. Are there any innovative ideas that have not yet been incorporated into new facilities, or any missed opportunities within recreation and facility planning?
Yeah, I would defer some of that to Katie, the expert when it comes to design. But I think there's definitely some areas for improvement when we're moving forward, when we're talking about creating spaces for our youth and our active older adults. One of the things that we did at Carl Madison Rec Center is that we designed it to make sure it met the needs of everyone. We didn't have dedicated spaces outside of our childcare. But moving forward, it's really, the commercial kitchens. I think that's something that we missed the mark on. But that's usually the first thing that gets cut because of the expenses. And so we are actually, as I mentioned, building another rec center, and the number one priority is to get a community kitchen, because it's in a community that is a food desert. And so we want to make sure that we're providing those amenities in the community. And the way to get ahead of that is now we're looking for fundraisers and sponsors to come in whether it's the Colorado Health Foundation or some other organizations that will help. But yeah, definitely, I think when it comes to that, some of those higher end amenities that usually get cut in the design because of the traditional rec center you want to have, your gymnasium, your pool, and so I think moving forward, a lot of lessons learned through over my 20 years in the field. But that's one thing that I would say is that we could do a better job of putting some of those other amenities there in communities.
Thank you. And with that, I'll pass it over to Katie.
A great question. And of course, we'd all love to have a crystal ball, but we are sort of seeing just the beginnings of some new program spaces and architectural design that incorporates what is being called here, at least, innovation centers. And this is, we believe, in response to the decline in the training for the trades. The trade partners that we work with are subcontractors on the job sites. And I don't know how much this is happening in Europe and in Canada, but in the United States, there's really been a loss in terms of passing on, excuse me, the skills of the trades from the older participants who approach the trades very differently than the youth do these days. And a lot of that training has dissipated in the United States and is not valued as much. We're seeing that coming back, which is a great thing. And so in one of the facilities that we're in design on right now in Northern Colorado, it's a community center that incorporates a library and an innovation center. And so these community programs support one another. And the innovation center allows different specialist trades, so masons, woodworking, steel workers, and those folks to come in and teach youth how the unique aspects of those trades, the artistic as well as the scientific aspects of those trades. And that's been really exciting because we've seen youth in middle school and high school, those folks who might not want to go on to sort of the traditional college path, at least in the United States, but they might have more of a passion to learn a trade, but the trade schools have diminished. And it makes sense as a really exciting community engagement program to incorporate those facilities within the larger community center. And then also from a more technical standpoint, I tend to be a little bit of a nerd on this, but we're creating new systems for the exterior walls at natatorium to really protect and maintain those facilities long-term. And we do that by creating a vacuum within that exterior wall, which protects the finishes, really great for long-term maintenance. And it has an exceedingly low cost, which helps for those project budgets that are challenged. There are some green innovations as well that are happening a little more. They're a little bit more traditional, but we're seeing more geothermal in the United States. That may be going on in Canada and Europe longer than it has in the United States, and reducing products and systems that have high carbon emissions as well, which I know is happening more and more worldwide, hopefully. So that's great.
Thank you, Katie. And I'll pass it off to Laura. And I do ask that we keep it to maybe 1 or 2 minutes as we are getting near to the end. Thank you.
Yes, I think also when we are working with the multipurpose facilities, we always have to push the barriers and the limits of the rules and regulations. Right now in Denmark, I think we have 8 or 10 projects around Denmark where they work with a connection between making a facility that contains the sports activities center together with daycare institutions and senior homes. But they are driven by 3 different kind of municipality organs with different kinds of rules, sets of rules and regulations. And it's not always that you can make those mix of functions as you want to do on the paper and do that in real life. So that we're working a lot with in Denmark right now, and are making some try and error projects.
Thank you, Laura. I believe we do have one more question we can go ask in this short amount of time. So I do ask that you keep your answers to about 1 minute. And the question is, what are the attributes of new community centers facilities that reflect the needs of youth who traditionally face systemic barriers? We can start this off with John again.
I think it starts at the very beginning of getting youth involved in the designing what are the amenities. And I keep going back to the St. Charles Park project because it was the youth that drove the process. And the youth ambassadors, they did everything from fundraising to design to being the decision makers with the consultants, and it's time. This is an underserved community that has historically been overlooked, and so those group of ambassadors have actually spread that model throughout the state. So they've actually traveled around to other underserved communities to talk about what the process is to be empowered. And these are youth that never had a voice. They had a rundown park in their neighborhood, and they thought that was normal. And so when you empower them from the very beginning and be authentic, and not just go through the check the box and go through the process, it goes a long way. And so we've, implemented that model throughout our communities to make sure that youth have a voice, and it teaches them life skills. And these youth have gone on to get jobs, and they've gone on to go to college. And those are things that when you hear these young people speak, they didn't think that they would ever have those opportunities, but through involving them in the very beginning, it made it possible.
Thank you, John. And I'll pass it off to Katie.
As John mentioned, the manager of the Carla Madison Recreation Center that John was our wonderful client on in downtown Denver, they created a program to teach climbing to African American and Latinx folks that were in the high school that's located immediately next to the recreation center. So these underserved kids that might not normally be exposed to something like climbing or skiing or golf, creating programs to help those kids learn. As John mentioned, it develops life skills. And I think the program, correct me if I'm wrong, John, was to take those high school kids, teach them on the bouldering wall outside, and then take them to the climbing wall that on that center is on the outside of the building, and then take them to the mountains, which, as John mentioned earlier, are really close by to us. And so they got the experience, and it really empowers the youth of those underserved communities to have someone help them engage on that. And also the innovation centers I mentioned a minute ago for kids who aren't in the majority and are exposed to those typical college paths to work in the trades is needed in society, and it helps those youth.
Thank you, Katie. And we'll end it off with the Danish perspective with Laura.
Yes, I'm not quite sure if I understood the question quite correctly, but in Denmark we have a very fine structure of clubs, and many of those clubs, to integrate everybody, work with role models and trainees programs, so that some of those kids who are not used to be a member of a club can get in, learn, and see what can you do as a volunteer in a club as well. You can be an active, but you can also be a volunteer. So it's the same as John and Katie were talking about, giving them the experience of the possibilities, that they really have to be a part of the practice before they can talk about what they want to have. So it's like a more long-term based way to engage them.
Thank you, Laura. So this does conclude the Recreation Facility Innovation Lecture Series. We do apologize if we were unable to get to any of your questions posted on Slido today, as we are very limited to time and we're almost getting close to this end. The past 3 lectures are now uploaded to the city's YouTube channel and are also available on the registration page. Today's session will be uploaded by this Friday. I want to thank our 3 panelists, John, Katie, and Laura, for sharing these very innovative ideas and helping enlighten this conversation with our network of professionals, and also helping in developing our roadmap. I'd like to thank our ASL interpreters, our IT support, Alex and Dennis, and the major recreation and cultural facilities team, Tina and Conrad. Most importantly, I would like to thank the audience who have been very active and have helped in the Q&A session and have been so great with all of your responses and feedback. It's been a pleasure hosting today, and thank you again for all of the feedback we've received. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.